Go ahead, eat something.
The rain didn't just fall that evening, it attacked. It slammed against the diner windows in angry waves, turning the outside world into a blur of headlights, water, and shadows. Thunder rolled so loud it rattled the silverware on the tables. Yet inside the small roadside diner, time seemed frozen. Only a few booths were occupied, and the neon sign above the counter flickered as if it, too, was tired of surviving the storm. At the far corner booth sat Ethan Cole, a man in his early 30s with broad shoulders worn down by responsibility and eyes that carried the exhaustion of someone who had learned to live without expecting help. His plate held a simple meal: eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee, something he had debated buying for 10 minutes before finally giving in. It wasn't luxury. It was survival disguised as comfort. Ethan was a widower, though he hated the word. It sounded too official for the kind of pain that woke him at night. His wife had died 2 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving him alone with a 6-year-old daughter and a mountain of unpaid bills. Every decision he made was measured in sacrifices: skip dinner today so she could have new shoes tomorrow, work overtime so the electricity stayed on another month. That breakfast in front of him wasn't just food. It was the first time in weeks he'd allowed himself something warm that wasn't leftovers. He lifted his fork, finally ready to eat, when the diner door burst open. A sharp gust of wind followed, carrying rain and cold with it, and every head in the diner turned. A woman stood frozen in the doorway, soaked from head to toe. Her hair clung to her face, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and her clothes looked torn, as if she'd run through something sharp just to get there. She didn't step inside right away. She just stood there, trembling, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to exist in that space. The waitress sighed quietly, already tired, already prepared to say no. "Ma'am," she called, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "We're closing soon." The woman's lips parted, but no sound came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than the rain outside. "Please, I just need a minute." Something in that voice made Ethan's hand stop midair. She walked in slowly, every step hesitant, as if the floor might disappear beneath her. Up close, it was clear she hadn't just been caught in a storm. She'd been through something worse. Fear clung to her the way the rain clung to her clothes. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and when she tried to wipe her face, she left smears of dirt and tears behind. The waitress glanced at her empty hands. "You ordering?" The woman swallowed hard. I don't have money." That was usually the end of the conversation. Ethan had seen it before. People turned away, eyes avoided, dignity stripped away with a single sentence. He expected the same now. What he didn't expect was the sudden tightness in his chest, the kind that made it hard to breathe. It reminded him of the night he'd stood in a hospital hallway with nothing but fear and unanswered prayers. Before he could think better of it, Ethan stood up. The vinyl seat squeaked as he slid out of the booth, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. Everyone watched as he picked up his plate and walked toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the food, but because of what it meant. This was his meal, his one comfort, his one small reward for surviving another week. He stopped in front of her and gently held out the plate. "Here," he said softly. "You should eat." Her eyes widened, shock replacing fear for just a second. "No," she whispered immediately, shaking her head. "I can't. That's yours." "I'll be fine," he replied, though he wasn't sure if that was true. "Please." Her resistance collapsed like a wall already full of cracks. Tears spilled over as she took the plate with shaking hands and sat down in the nearest booth. She didn't eat politely. She ate like someone who hadn't known when their next meal would come. Each bite was fast, desperate, and painful to watch. Tears fell freely now, dropping onto the plate, but she didn't stop. Ethan sat across from her, not touching anything, just making sure she didn't choke or collapse. Up close, he noticed bruises on her wrists, faint but unmistakable. Her eyes darted to the door every few seconds like she expected someone to come bursting through. "My name is Lena," she said between bites, barely meeting his gaze. "I'm Ethan," he replied. "You're safe here." She let out a shaky breath, as if hearing that aloud made it more real. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm continued outside, but inside that booth, something quieter and heavier existed. Two strangers sharing a moment that would change both their lives forever. Ethan didn't ask questions. He didn't need answers. He knew that look. It was the look of someone who had lost everything and was still running. When she finished eating, she stared at the empty plate like it might disappear. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Ethan said gently, "but I wanted to." She stood a few minutes later, pulling her soaked jacket tighter around herself. At the door, she paused and looked back at him, her eyes shining with something more than gratitude, something close to hope. Then she was gone. Ethan returned to his booth, staring at the empty space where his breakfast had been. His stomach growled, but his heart felt strangely full. He didn't know it yet, but that simple act, the one meal he gave away, had just rewritten his future. 3 weeks passed, yet the memory of that stormy night refused to fade from Ethan Cole's mind. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. Early mornings, long shifts, cheap dinners, and bedtime stories for his daughter, Lily. But something inside him felt unsettled. He found himself glancing at the diner whenever he drove past, half expecting to see Lena sitting by the window, dry and smiling, as if the storm had never touched her. But the booth remained empty, and with each passing day, Ethan convinced himself that what he'd done was small, forgettable, something the world would swallow without a trace. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet and Lily slept with her stuffed bear tucked under her chin, Ethan wondered where she had gone and whether she was safe. Then the letter came. It was waiting on the kitchen table when he returned home one evening, placed neatly among overdue bills and school notices. Unlike the others, it didn't scream urgency in red ink. Instead, it was heavy, cream-colored, and sealed with an emblem pressed into the paper. Ethan's stomach tightened instantly. Letters like that never meant anything good for people like him. His mind raced through worst-case scenarios, legal trouble, debt collectors, something he didn't even know he'd done wrong. For several minutes, he just stood there, staring at it, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and his own uneven breathing. Finally, he opened it. The message inside was brief, formal, and unsettling. "Mr. Ethan Cole, you are requested to appear at the law offices of Hartman and Wills regarding a matter of personal and urgent importance concerning Ms. Lena Hart." His hands went cold. Lena. The name leapt off the page like a warning. Why would lawyers be contacting him about her? Had something happened? Had she been hurt? Or worse? Guilt surged through him, sharp and unrelenting. He remembered the bruises on her wrists, the way her eyes never stopped scanning the room. Had he done enough? Should he have called the police? Should he have insisted she stay? Sleep didn't come that night. The next morning, after dropping Lily off at school, Ethan boarded 2 buses across town, each stop taking him farther from a life he understood and closer to something that made his chest ache with dread. The law firm was housed in a towering glass building that reflected the sky like a mirror. Ethan paused outside, adjusting his worn jacket and scuffed shoes, suddenly very aware of how out of place he looked among polished professionals moving confidently through the revolving doors. Inside, everything smelled clean and expensive. Marble floors gleamed under bright lights, and the quiet was thick with importance. A receptionist led him to a conference room overlooking the city, where skyscrapers stood like monuments to lives far removed from his own. Ethan sat at the long table, hands clenched together, rehearsing what he would say if they accused him of something. He didn't know what he was guilty of, only that he already felt guilty. 2 attorneys entered a few minutes later. One was older, his expression calm but kind. The other younger, sharp-eyed and serious. They introduced themselves and took seats across from him, placing a thick folder on the table. "Mr. Cole," the older attorney began, "thank you for coming on such short notice." Ethan swallowed. "Is Lena okay?" The younger attorney nodded. "She is safe now." Relief washed over him, so suddenly he had to grip the edge of the table. But confusion followed immediately. "Then why am I here?" The attorneys exchanged a glance before opening the folder. The younger one slid a photograph toward him. Ethan froze. The woman in the photo was radiant, standing in front of a high-end gallery, dressed in elegant clothes, confidence glowing in her smile. Her hair was styled, her eyes bright and alive. If not for the familiar curve of her face, Ethan wouldn't have believed it was the same woman who trembled in a diner booth, soaked and broken. "That's her?" he whispered. "Yes," the older attorney said gently. "Ms. Lena Hart is a celebrated investigative journalist and the sole beneficiary of a significant private estate." Ethan shook his head slowly. "That doesn't make sense. She said she had nothing." At that moment, the attorney replied, "She did." They explained everything then. Lena had been working on an expose involving powerful individuals, people who did not want the truth uncovered. When threats escalated into violence, she fled, abandoning her identity, her resources, and her support system. Trauma fractured her sense of safety. She refused protection. She ran until she had nothing left but fear and the clothes on her back. And then, the younger attorney added, "She met you." Ethan's throat tightened. "I just gave her food." "You gave her dignity," the older attorney said. "When she believed she was invisible." They revealed that Lena had been found days later and placed in a private recovery facility. As she began to heal, she spoke of one moment that stayed with her. The man who had given away his only meal without expecting anything in return. "She insisted we find you," the attorney said. "Not to repay a debt, but to honor a kindness." The folder was slid closer to Ethan. Inside were documents he didn't understand at first. Numbers that didn't seem real. Words like grant, trust, and beneficiary blurred together as his eyes filled with tears. What is this?" he asked. The younger attorney smiled softly. "Ms. Hart established a private fund in your name and your daughter's. Enough to secure housing, education, healthcare, and financial stability for several years." Ethan pushed the folder back instinctively. "I can't accept this." "She insisted," the older attorney said. Her exact words were, "When I felt like the world had erased me, he saw me. I want his child to grow up knowing kindness changes lives." Ethan broke then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears falling onto the polished table as the weight of it all settled in. One breakfast, one decision, a moment he'd nearly talked himself out of, now echoing through his entire life. When he finally stood to leave, the city outside no longer looked so distant. It looked possible. The changes in Ethan Cole's life did not arrive all at once, and that somehow made them feel more real. There was no sudden mansion, no dramatic celebration, no instant escape from the habits of survival he had spent years building. Instead, the transformation came quietly, step by careful step, as if life itself was afraid to move too fast and frighten him back into fear. The first thing Ethan did was sit at his small kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed, the legal folder open in front of him, just staring at the numbers until they stopped looking like a mistake. He didn't feel excitement at first. He felt responsibility, a deep, steady weight in his chest that whispered, "Don't waste this." Within a month, Ethan and Lily moved into a modest apartment in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't extravagant, but it was solid. The roof didn't leak. The heater worked without rattling like it might die any second. For the first time since his wife passed, Ethan slept through the night without waking in panic, calculating bills in his head. Lily noticed the difference immediately. She laughed more freely. She stopped asking if they could turn the lights off to save money. She spread her homework across the kitchen table without fear of being told there wasn't space. One evening, as Ethan tucked her into bed, she looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, are we okay now?" He swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." With stability came courage. Ethan enrolled in a technical design certification program, something he had dreamed of years ago, but abandoned when life demanded sacrifice instead of ambition. Sitting in a classroom again felt strange at first. He was older than most students, quieter, more careful. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Lena's words as the lawyers had spoken them. He saw me, and now, he reminded himself, I must honor that by seeing my own worth too. Months passed. Ethan found part-time work that complemented his studies, and slowly, the future stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a promise. Lily joined a school art club and covered their refrigerator with drawings. Bright suns, smiling faces, and one picture that made Ethan's chest ache: a man holding a plate out to a woman under falling rain. He never asked her where the idea came from. From time to time, Ethan drove past the diner. It looked the same flickering sign, same foggy windows when it rained. Sometimes he went inside, sitting at the booth near the window, ordering a simple breakfast even when he wasn't hungry. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was a quiet way of honoring a moment that had reshaped his entire life. He never saw Lena again. No letters. No calls. The lawyers had said she needed distance to heal, and Ethan respected that. Some people aren't meant to stay in your life. Some are meant to change it. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year later, Ethan left the diner and paused outside as thunder rolled in the distance. He watched people hurry past, heads down, rushing through their own storms. And for the first time, he understood something he hadn't that night long ago. Kindness doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask for witnesses. It doesn't promise rewards. Most of the time, it feels like loss, like giving away the last thing you have and hoping it doesn't break you. But sometimes, in ways we cannot predict or control, kindness moves through the world like a quiet current, touching lives long after the moment has passed. Ethan never thought of himself as a hero. He still didn't. He was just a father who gave up a meal because someone else needed it more. But that single choice had become a bridge between despair and hope, between survival and living, between two strangers whose paths crossed for only minutes and yet echoed for a lifetime. That night, Ethan went home to Lily, helped her with homework, and read her a story before bed. As he turned off the light, she wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Daddy, thank you for being kind." He smiled in the darkness, his eyes burning, because now he knew kindness is never wasted.